Hello again to Mr. Heiler students, and I hope that you're having a good week. I hope that the things that we did earlier this week to look at our two sources, thinking about when and how states should reopen after the COVID-19 crisis, was interesting to you and got you thinking and maybe even having some conversations with your family and friends. So we're going to jump back into our lesson. Now, even though mine is still somewhat blank, hopefully you have quite a bit of writing that you've already done in part 1A, B, C, and D. So we are now going to pick up on part 2. And part 2 is going to, again, require us to do a little bit of writing, and we're going to go back into those sources, and we're going to try to start writing a little bit on our own. So for the first part, we are going to be considering evidence. We're going to be thinking about the kinds of evidence that the two sources use. And I'm going to walk you through that just a little bit. We're going to kind of go back and look at what is there, and then we might even think about some quotes that we could pull out and use for our own argument, trying to say, here's what other people are saying, and here's what I believe. So let's go back in and let's look at ABC. So we know even from the title that the headline, this is going to be about a poll, and we see that right here as we're reading, we see, oh, okay, a new ABC News poll. And now there are nice pictures of the poll, but we could also just say right here, like, here's some evidence. Just over 8 in 10 Americans are concerned about contracting the virus. So we could use that as one piece of evidence that we might pull. We might even say, 72% believe moving too quickly to loosen the stay-at-home orders is a greater threat to the country than moving too slowly. So we might take that as a piece of evidence. And what we can do then is we can go back to our main document and we can actually, quite literally paste that in. Now, we would want to make sure that we're using quotation marks and that we're then, pasting in whatever that text happens to be, so we know that we've got an exact quote. But you could put that right in there, and that would be an example. And again, we want to see what are the different types of evidence that each source is using. And I think what you'll probably notice as you look at the two different sources is that they use different kinds of evidence. So let's look over at the other source as well and think about what they say. So in this piece, what we have here are, statements from the governor of Tennessee and the governor of Georgia. And we have quotes from them, and we have some particular dates when things might be opening. And unlike the ABC source, they don't necessarily see polls. And again, to look at the ABC source, we see some polls and things like that, but we don't necessarily see quotes from politicians or doctors or experts or anything like that. So again, I want you to just pause the video and think about what you see. Try to grab a few pieces of evidence and fill out that considering evidence chart so we can better understand what type of evidence each source is using and how it might be useful for you as you go about crafting your own argument. All right, so now that you've thought about the types of evidence that are in each one of the two articles, we're going to take some of that evidence and begin to work on our own argument. So I want to model this just a little bit for you, but certainly hope that you don't need to feel like you're doing exactly what I'm doing here. You can use your own words, and of course, by the time you get to the end of this paragraph, you're definitely going to want to have your own opinion. So with that, one of the things that we'll do is that we're going to take each one of these ideas and try to explain them a little bit more. So first things first, when it comes to the topic of when to reopen America after the worst of the COVID-19 crisis is over, most of us will readily agree that, and that's where I would go ahead and begin writing. And depending on exactly how you feel, and as you've read these different articles, chances are you're probably going to say something to the effect that we agree that it needs to happen so the economy can recover, that people can get back to work and begin to rebuild their lives. Something along those lines. Now, then you'll get to this point. So this is where we want to make sure that we're making our topic interesting. We're bringing some flavor to it, and to say that this is not just a one-sided argument. A lot of people might agree on one part of this, but where it gets interesting is that we don't always agree on what the best solution is. And so that's where you might go to say, where this agreement usually ends, however, is on the question of, And again, for instance, you might say something about when, you may say something about how, you may say something about where the reopening should begin. However you want to craft your argument is fine, because ultimately it is your argument and you're going to get to explore it in a little bit more detail. Then, in this third bullet point and the fourth bullet point, what you're trying to do is pull out some evidence. Now, again, if I was going to say, like, on the one hand, ABC News reports, I might go back and I might say, ABC News reports that 72% of Americans believe moving too quickly. And I could take this, and maybe I even had that up in my considering evidence segment, and I could use that as an exact quote, or I could paraphrase. So I might say, if I was going to paraphrase, ABC News reports that 72% of Americans fear that opening up too soon might be detrimental. And again, you will probably want to go back up in here and look at what you've had and make sure that you're finding, again, that evidence that you feel best supports the point that you want to make. And introduce the debate, again, in a nuanced and complex and interesting way, not just say it's this way or it's that way. Then, of course, you're going to go back to the other source. So let's look at reason. And let's say, for instance, we want to pull this quote from Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. So we could take that quote, and again, we could copy and paste that, and maybe you already had that up in your table, but we could bring that down here. On the other hand, Reason Magazine reports that Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee believes, and I would pull that quote in, social distancing must continue, but our economic shutdown cannot. And he goes on to outline a plan for how he will open by such and such date. So I would type that in there. Now we get to the interesting part. You get to define your own argument and say why. So here is where you would begin by saying, my own view on reopening America after the COVID-19 crisis, the worst of it is over, is that we should, and then you'll fill in that blank, and then you want to add the because. You want to add a little bit more about what it is you believe and why you believe that. And now this paragraph, once you're done, kind of forms the beginning of what could become a much longer essay. I'm not quite sure what Mr. Heiler is going to have you do with it. He might just have you end with the paragraph here, so you'll have to listen for instructions from him. But the idea is that you've at least gotten both sides of the debate out, and you've started to funnel your ideas and come up with your own argument. So I hope this process has been useful for you. I hope that you might consider, again, going back to a source later on when you try to create new arguments like all sides, where you can get a number of different topics and you can delve in and look a little more deeply on any and all of those topics, and that it might help you rather than feeling like you get lost just by going to Google to get started on developing your thesis for an argumentative essay. You can at least start to see what different sides of the story are saying. Okay, so I know I said you could stop the video, but I did want to provide you with just a couple more ideas in case you really like this idea of creating your own argument and finding out more about these different topics. So I want to walk you through 3 additional sources: procon.org, Kialo, and Gale's Opposing Viewpoints in Context. Let's take a look. So the first one that I like to share is procon.org, because they have dozens and dozens of different topics that you can jump into and take a look at and figure out what you might be interested in and find out, as the name implies, the pros and cons of each side of the argument. So you can jump in and take a look at many of those different sources and find out more, and then even dig into more sources from there. The second one that I wanted to share with you is called Kialo EDU. And so what you're able to do is jump in and take a look at a bunch of different debates and things like that. Now, this is something that your teacher might need to start up for you, but it's also something, if you're really interested in Kialo and Mr. Heiler doesn't want to do that for you, you can just go to Kialo itself and you can look at many of the debates that are available right there on their page. So Kialo EDU might be something that you could encourage him to set up, or you might be able to log in and take a look at some of the other debates that are available there. Finally, the other one that's available to you and is available to all of us as Michigan residents is right on the Michigan Electronic Library. So if you go to mel.org and you scroll down, at least right now it's on the home page, it's this one called Opposing Viewpoints in Context. And once you click on there, you'll go ahead and you will see Gale's Opposing Viewpoints in Context. And you can see some of the latest issues that are up there. And you can delve into those topics. Or, of course, you can go into any of these other types of topics. And once you click into the topic, then it gives you a whole bunch of other resources, different articles, podcasts, links to news sources, reference materials, infographics, all kinds of great things. So I hope that you continue to think about how to assert your own opinion and to create an argument of your own, and that some of these additional resources above and beyond what we already looked at with all sides could be really helpful for you now as well as in the future. Thanks again for inviting me into your virtual classroom this week, and I look forward to hopefully being able to collaborate with you again sometime in the future.